The Chicago White Sox now have the distinction of throwing a World Series and having the most losses in a 162-game season. Let's discuss which distinction is worse next on Locked On White Sox.
You are Locked On White Sox, your daily Chicago White Sox podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, I'm your host, Todd Welter, a lifelong Sox fan and the site expert of SouthsideShowdown.com, part of the FanSided Network, and also I've covered Major League Baseball for outlets such as the Associated Press. And thanks for making Locked On White Sox your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure to hit the like button on today's episode. Subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox if you've not done so already, and also follow or subscribe to the show at wherever you get your podcasts. Well, that's right, Sox fans. Our team now has the distinction of having a club that threw a World Series and had the worst season in baseball history, at least contextually. Let's discuss in the first segment which is the darker mark in team history. And then the Sox had a record 63 players suit up this season. Let's discuss those pitchers who somehow got a roster spot, but should have never had one in the first place. And then finally, a Sox legend is attempting a comeback. Let's talk about if it is worth Jose Abreu's time. And before the show begins, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. All right, so this question came from an emailer. Shout out to Fat Bank. There's a guy who's got an email address that starts with Fat Bank. He emails me. We exchange emails. And just, again, to let you know, you can email me at lockedonsox@gmail.com or lockedonwhitesox@gmail.com. I'll respond back. For those, fans that lonely or wanting to vent and frustrated, we can exchange emails as long as it doesn't get weird between us. I'm fine. I'm down for it. But he emailed me, asked me, what is worse for the Sox, throwing a World Series or having the all-time loss record in a 162-game season? And my answer is throwing the World Series. The interesting thing, though, is dysfunction within the Sox led to both of these terrible historical markers happening. Both led to terrible outcomes, but one cost the Sox a championship, and it also took the Sox 40 years just to get back to the World Series. It took basically 40 years to rebound from the 1919 Black Sox Scandal. That's a long time. Now, history may prove otherwise, but while the Sox might be replacing the 62 Mets for the infamous distinction of being the worst team of all time, 7 years later, the Mets won the World Series. Now, maybe the Sox don't bounce back as quickly. Maybe the Sox don't bounce back at all, because don't rule it out. But at least in the historical context, you can bounce back from setting an all-time loss record. Even the 1916 Philadelphia A's that I've talked about a few times, they eventually went back and won a World Series under Connie Mack. So you can rebound from these historically awful seasons. And if you give me the 1899 Cleveland Spiders, yeah, they folded. And again, the context. The owner owned two teams. He sent all his best players to the other team he owned. Okay? So that's one of the reasons why the White Sox will always be considered one of the worst team of all time, at least contextually. But you can bounce back from that. It's hard to rebound from missing out on a title on purpose, especially when 8 players get thrown out of the game for life. And now you could argue, though, the Black Sox have been romanticized in a way, even much like the 62 Mets. The 62 Mets, they had that charismatic Hall of Fame manager who placed the that label, the Amazing Mets, and the Amazins have become kind of the identity of the New York Mets, especially since 7 years later they won the World Series. And you think about the Black Sox, Field of Dreams. Shoeless Joe Jackson has become basically this tragic figure, unjustly thrown out of the game for life. He should have been back in. All that stuff. It's been kind of romanticized, where the 121 lost White Sox, they'll never be romanticized. Fans were hoping that the Sox would actually lose a few more games, because not only would you have the all-time loss record, but the all-time worst winning percentage record. And that could be hung over, despised owner Jerry Reinsdorf's neck for the rest of his life, like an albatross. That would be his legacy. So, and people were hoping for that. But still, winning a title is hard to do. And the White Sox had some players who felt otherwise and threw that chance away. Well, some say those players changed their mind, but it was too late. Again, the Sox lost in 8 games. That's when it used to be a best of 9. So, history kind of fluctuates on what exactly did happen. But again, there was grand jury testimony that somehow magically, got lost during these trials after these players were charged. But there was grand jury testimony admitting that this happened. But no one from the 1919 White Sox was convicted for throwing the World Series, but Judge Mountain Landis, the commissioner at the time, threw 8 players out, and one of the best hitters of all time, in Shoeless Joe Jackson. You lose those types of players. And again, I've only read about them. No, clearly didn't see them live, but you lose guys like Jackson, Eddie Seacock, Buck Weaver so abruptly. That is hard to replace. And clearly it took the White Sox until the 50s just to get competitive again. And now, granted, it's hard to get back to the World Series when you look at it in historical context. It's hard, like when you have in the 20s the Yankees just running roughshed. I get that. But look at how long it took the White Sox just to get back to even being a decent team and then getting back to the playoffs after that. But the dysfunction was so bad for the Sox in 1919 that players felt no loyalty to the team, that they were willing to throw a World Series. This is from TTW.com's write-up on the scandal. This is what they write. The 1919 Chicago White Sox had all the makings of a championship team. They were dominant heading into the World Series that fall, having clinched the American League pennant, but behind the scenes, things were not exactly harmonious. The atmosphere in the clubhouse had grown toxic, with 2 cliques that did not get along well off the field. One group was led by team captains Eddie Collins, was made up of more educated, polished men. The other clique, made up of such players as shortstop Swede Risberg, center fielder Happy Flesh, and first baseman Chick Gandil, was a bit more ragtag. Then there was Charles Comiskey, the team's owner, who after the scandal developed a penny pinching reputation, despite the oft-repeated myth that Comiskey had underpaid his players, leading them to seek payment by less honest means. Many members of the 1919 White Sox were among the highest paid in professional baseball. Still, as a boss, Comiskey was not popular with some of his players. So you had dysfunction in 1919. You clearly have dysfunction in 2024. That led to both of these terrible historical marks in franchise history. But which is, again, worse, think about the integrity of the game coming into question. The 2024 White Sox were terrible, and sometimes they were just so bad that it was offensive to our senses. But this team never called into question that you were watching, WWE. People, yes, they watch WWE because there's the admission. This is fake. Well, not fake, but these outcomes are predetermined. They're calling the match in the ring. They're allowing themselves to basically be suplexed. You don't have, a pitcher saying, he might incidentally be tipping his pitches, but you don't have a pitcher out there saying, throwing a fastball. That way the hitter knows he can crush it for entertainment purposes. We believe we're watching a non-predetermined outcome. Even though in this case, most of the time it looked like the Sox were going to get crushed. Because of the talent gap, there was still a potential that the Sox could win the game, and the game was not being quote unquote being called. And again, throwing away a championship opportunity is wasting a precious moment, because it took the Sox just 40 years to get back to the World Series in 1959, and then another 46 years to get to their second one to finally win it. You don't know when you're ever going back. That's why you can never waste those moments. And losing 121 games, yeah, it's probably a mark that'll never be broken. But it's because of all the technology, data, analytics, and just sheer the ability that, learn your lessons from what the Sox did to avoid it. Throwing a World Series, that'll probably never happen again either, but the consequences are way more severe. You're getting banned for life. And yes, I know there's a lot of you out there that wants to be like, if you set a record for that many losses, you should be forced to sell the team. Jerry Reinsdorf should never be around baseball. I get it. But the consequences are not as severe as you throw the World Series, you're out because the integrity of the game is in question. But again, the interesting thing is Dysfunction created an environment for the Sox to throw a World Series, and it created an environment for the Sox to be so bad that they lost 121 games. And that dysfunction dynamic was well described and well reported last month by a bunch of national media outlets and in August. You can go back and listen to some previous shows too. And a lot of that chaos was caused by ownership under Jerry Reinsdorf. And that's the thing. Dysfunction just needs to be eradicated from this organization. If you look at the history of this franchise, it is a lot of dysfunction. But this dysfunction's got to get out of here. If this organization especially is supposed to have that eventual happy ending, like what happened in 1969 for the New York Mets. And it's going to be hard as long as Jerry Reinsdorf owns the team. And it's even going to be harder because you and I have to put faith in what seems to be an overwhelmed and unqualified Chris Getz. Yeah, he deserves his flowers because he is continuing to overturn and modernize the front office. But every big moment so far to show that, hey, this guy is capable of doing the job, he has failed to meet. It's easy to fire a bunch of international scouts because, yeah, you're doing terrible in international scouting. It's easy to say, we need more analytics because our defense can't be positioned correctly. But we have to put our faith that Chris Getz then can go and hire the right people. He's only hired Brian Bannister, in my opinion, to make me feel comfortable that this guy is capable of making the correct decisions or the correct replacements. And again, the problem is you've got that shadow GM in Tony La Russa still looming over the team. Now, granted, the only decision he should be involved in is if, Skip Schumacher is determined to be the next manager, then you want him in the room to help close the deal because of their connections to each other. But otherwise, the shadow GM's got to go. The owner must get out of the way until he dies. And that's just sad that you and I have to wait for a human being to die for hopefully then a new owner to come in and make sure that things definitely do get better, that the dysfunction is completely eradicated, that there is no even potential harm of dysfunction. And it's really hard to see that if the glimmer of hope that of Chris Getz, he is giving us a little bit of glimmer, a little bit of an illusion. It's really hard to see if that is actually going to become a reality in the future. Or is it just going to continue to be nothing more than an illusion? Well, this 121 loss season featured the Sox rolling out 63 players. Let's discuss the pitchers who were rolled out that should have not have even been here in the first place. Let's discuss that next on Locked On White Sox. PrizePicks is the best place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings, PrizePicks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least two players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. Run your game all season long on PrizePicks. PrizePicks invented the flex play, which means you can still cash out if your lineup isn't perfect. You can double your money even if one of your picks doesn't hit. PrizePicks is the best way to get action on sports in over 30 states, including Illinois, Wisconsin, Michigan, Minnesota, Iowa, and Indiana. PrizePicks puts its members first, so all withdrawals are fast, safe, and secure. So when your picks hit, you can get your money in as quick as 15 minutes. So let's see. Fun and simple concept. Can play basically anywhere in the Midwest, and you can get your money up. You can get your money quickly. Sign me up. Sign up today and get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. PrizePicks also offers weekly promotions that can lead to big payouts like Taco Tuesday. Each Tuesday, PrizePicks discounts select player projections up to 25% to provide even more value for your lineups. PrizePicks, run your game. And this episode of Locked On White Sox is brought to you by Booking.com. Booking.com, Booking.yeah, with hotels, bread and breakfasts, vacation rentals, resorts, and so much more. On Booking.com, you might just find your perfect stay, even in your baseball rival city during the postseason. The Guardians and the Tigers, they're facing each other in the ALDS right now. Maybe take a last-minute trip up to Detroit to root against them. Maybe take it in Motown while you're at it. Use Booking.com to book your next stay. And, hey, maybe root against Kansas City. They're on the cusp of being eliminated. Make a last-minute trip to KC, root against the Royals. Get some KC barbecue and check out the Negro League Museum. Booking.com can help you book a stay that's close to your home team's or rival stadium. No matter what the team you are rooting for this postseason, Booking.com can make you a fan of any U.S. city. From hotels that look over stadiums to family-friendly resorts to cute bed and breakfast stays, Booking.com has so many choices across the U.S. The right stay can make you a fan of any U.S. city, even your baseball rivals. Booking.com, Booking.yeah. And welcome back into Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Again, make sure to hit the like button on today's episode and subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox if you've not done so already. And if you can't catch the show on YouTube, follow or subscribe to the show on wherever you get your podcasts. As Locked On White Sox is available at places such as Apple and Spotify. Again, say you're stuck in traffic on the Kennedy, you got to do that commute, or say you're riding the Metro or the L into work. Hey, pop me on your headphones. Let's talk, let's talk some White Sox baseball, although it's technically a one-sided conversation. But again, you can always email me. You can always send me comments on Twitter. We can talk there too. Let me be your companion, for getting you through the off season, because it's probably not going to be a good off season either. And hopefully I've been there to get you through. And if I have, hey, leave a 5-star review, because, I've got some 5-star reviews, but when I first started the show, it's like riding a bike for me for podcasting, as I've done in the past, but it takes a little bit maybe to get back in the flow of things. People, wrote some things like, how dare I drink coffee? And how dare I have this thing called pace? So, hey, let's overcome those haters. Leave some 5-star reviews if you can. Really appreciate it. All right. So you use 63 players in a season, and 121 losses are usually going to likely be the final outcome. Well, if those, if those 63 players are mostly bad, then you're going to likely lose 121 games, especially if the bulk of them are bad pitchers. And the Sox rolled out a good amount of those, especially when hindsight proved maybe you should have went younger. Go with your younger, exciting arms. That could have been a better option. I mean, think about it. Drew Thorpe's big league debut was delayed because, gosh darn it, Brad Keller and Mike Clevinger needed some starts to see if those veteran arms could help win some games, even though you got off to one of the worst starts ever when you're 3-22. Season's lost. You're not turning things around like the Detroit Tigers did. But hey, let's get them some starts, because maybe they can be showcased to be flipped at the trade deadline. And when they eventually failed, hindsight shows, man, you wasted a lot of time. Sean Burke had a solid season in AAA. Could have been brought up sooner, but instead, Jake Woodford got the tab. He got the promotion. That's right. The Sox wasted our time with some of these guys. And in one instance, they picked the wrong veteran out of spring training to be on the roster. I mean, that's just clear organizational malpractice with what they did with Brian Shaw. But let's discuss these randos that the Sox actually gave some innings to that probably would have been better going to, the exciting future, young, promising arms. Probably that's where it should have went. Woodford actually got 2 starts in late May and in early June, and promptly gave up 10 earned runs and 15 hits in 8 1/3 innings. He got tagged for 7 runs and 10 hits on June 6th against Boston, which at the time, that was the team's 14th straight loss. And at the time, that was a franchise record, which eventually got broken a few months later and tied an AL record when they had a 21-game losing streak. The Sox lost 7-2 to the Blue Jays in his first start and 14-2 to Boston in his second. Probably would have just had better luck bullpenning those 2 games, although I think that's what they were trying to do. And Woodford was just bad. He was just terrible. Mike Clevinger wasted our time with 4 terrible starts. Well, 3 terrible starts and one where he didn't even get to the 5th inning. But 16 total innings, 22 hits, 13 runs. He had 1 start where the Sox actually did win, May 11th against the Guardians, where he went 4 2/3 innings and allowed a run. But the problem with him, besides having highly questionable character, was his pitch counts got up high way too quickly, and he looked nothing like the value pitcher he was in 2023. Value by the numbers, not by the human being standards, okay? In fact, he looked like the pitcher that the open market passed on twice. Remember, he was on waivers in 2023. All a team had to do when he was actually had decent numbers, all the team had to do was take on his, the prorated portion of his salary, and they said, no, thank you. And then he was a free agent during the entire offseason, and the Sox still signed him. There are 29 other teams that think Mike Clevinger is not worth it, and then there's the White Sox. And the Sox keep thinking he has value despite domestic violence allegations and a long injury history. And it wasn't long until he ended up on the 15-day IL, and this time it was not a short stay like in 2023, but a season-ending one. Brian Shaw was the veteran pitcher the Sox went with out of spring training. This is, again, hindsight being 2020, a preview of, man, this general manager is not the best at picking players to construct a roster, at least a bullpen, because they went with Brian Shaw instead of Jake Cousins and Jesse Chavez. Shaw lasted just 5 games, pitching just 4 innings where he gave up 8 hits, 5 runs, 4 of them earned, and blew a save in his final appearance with the Sox on April 10th. He only lasted until April 10th. Jesse Chavez, on the other hand, went back to Atlanta, where he posted a 3.13 ERA and a 1.25 whip in 63 1/3 innings. And I talked on Monday about Jake Cousins and the pretty good season he had in New York. Touki Toussaint, for some reason, got into 11 games and pitched 23 innings, and it all came after the trade deadline. That's the biggest example of organizational malpractice. Instead of giving, say, Jairo Iriarte an extra month in the big leagues, or a whole host of other younger pitchers like, say, Prelander Baroa, bring him back up a little bit sooner, give him more of a runway, you and I had to be subjected to Touki. We had to be subjected to watching him pitch. A bad veteran pitcher with a cool name. And he was typically piggybacked with Garrett Crochet when, the ace was placed on his innings restriction. And again, hindsight being 2020, that would have been a prime spot to pair up Crochet with, say, Iriarte, who was stretched out at the time, maybe Sean Burke, Kai Bush, but practically anyone but Touki. Heck, Chris Flexen could still have gotten innings. And then the young arms could have gotten the starts. You still could have given, Chris Flexen a few innings. Could have had Crochet pitch 3, Flexen pitch, or Crochet pitch 4, Flexen pitch 4, throw somebody else out there in the first inning, in the 9th inning. By the way, he recently elected free agency, so I will not be shocked to see him eventually return as a non-roster spring training invite. Also, utility infielder Danny Mendick. He actually pitched 1 inning of relief in a blowout loss. He elected free agency, and don't be surprised to see him back on the Mets as a non-roster invite or the Sox as an NRI. Well, speaking of someone who is seeking a non-roster invite from any of the 30 teams, Sox legend Jose Abreu is attempting a comeback after being released by the Houston Astros earlier this season. Let's discuss if that's a good idea next on Locked On White Sox. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. FanDuel is amazing for parlays, props, and futures. The traditional spreads, over, under, and money lines, they're also great on FanDuel, but it's the parlays, props, and futures that makes using America's #1 sportsbook just so much fun. Americans, hey, we don't like ties, but FanDuel has it at plus 290 for the Bears and Jaguars ending the first quarter in a tie. You can put $10 on that, and if it hits, you can nearly triple your money. Double your money if the Bears score in all 4 quarters, as that is going off at plus 210, and each team scoring in all 4 quarters, that's going off at plus 1,200. And hey, maybe you're holding out hope that the Blackhawks can overachieve and make the playoffs. That is at plus 830 right now. That is FanDuel.com. Welcome back into Locked On White Sox. I am your host, Todd Welter. Again, shout out to all my everydayers out there that have stuck with me this far. You guys are awesome. Got a very loyal following. We're growing the YouTube community. Keep telling your friends. Hey, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Keep telling your friends to follow or like the or follow or subscribe to the wherever they get their podcasts, whether it's Apple or Spotify. Let's keep growing the community. I know a lot of you may have been checking out on the White Sox, but hey, if you ever occasionally want to check in, hey, I'm here. As I was texting with one of my best friends from childhood. He was the best man at my wedding. He's also a loyal Sox fan, although he was even saying, is it worth actually admitting into it? And while he's got 3 kids, it's hard for him to listen. His dad listens, and he was telling me that his dad reported back to him that I might be one of the few people that are still actually watching White Sox, that were watching the White Sox games. And yeah, willing to do it. I'm here for you. It's how I give back to the community, a great community. I mean, the White Sox social media community is just outstanding still. The fan base, we can commiserate well together. So, hey, that's what I'm here for. So Jose Abreu has earned the right to do with whatever he wants with his career, but it would be nice for him to realize it's time to call it one. Instead, he's attempting a comeback by signing up to play winter ball in Puerto Rico. That's according to Francis Romero. He tweeted that out. But man, Father Time is telling Jose it is time to officially call it a career. Things went so bad for Abreu this season that his slash line was 124, 167, and 195 with a 0 WRC plus and 2 home runs in 35 games for Houston. I mean, he was struggling so badly that he actually accepted a demotion to the Astros Complex League. And when he returned, things didn't get much better, and he was released midway through the season. Also, his numbers have been slowly declining the past 2 seasons. He went from a 304, 378, 466 slash line in 2022, his last with the White Sox, and he had a 3.8 F4 to 236, 296, 383 slash line in 2023 with the Astros, and a minus 0.4 F4. Now, he did hit 18 home runs last season, which was 3 more than 2022, but you just keep seeing the steady decline in his numbers, like his ISO numbers, steadily declining. And he's going to be 38 next season. Now, if he's playing winter ball to maybe just get that taste out of having a bad season out of his mouth and having a better finish to his baseball career, fine. And if he's wanting to do it just to play baseball because he loves it, fine. Enjoy the love of the game. But this intention of making a comeback is going to be hard to watch because this is a legend that should know his time is up. But he's clinging to the game. And it's hard for those types of guys that are icons. And he was he may not be an overall Major League Baseball icon, but he's an icon for the White Sox. He's one of the greatest players that ever played for the White Sox. I'm sorry. And if you disagree, look at his numbers and where they stack in franchise history. And again, he was one of the few players that was worth watching during the previous rebuild. But it's hard for them to give it up because, again, it's the only life that they've ever known. And he does play first base. And if he can show some production in winter ball, a team is likely to give him an invite to spring training since first base is just not a value position anymore. Although, again, if you're thinking, hey, bring him back, no, we're not going to do a reunion. Again, he's 38. You bring him back, even if the Sox, don't tender Andrew Vaughn and Gavin Sheets, you're bringing them back. You're just getting in the way of even giving a young player like Tim Elko, who's shown some promise. You're taking away at bats from him. Or again, you could bring in Josh Bell for $1 million less potentially than Andrew Vaughn and potentially flip him at the deadline, although you're probably just going to get cash considerations. But no, there's no value. It'd be nice to have, the reminisce tour, but if he's not producing and his numbers are declining, it's just not worth it. I'm sorry. Not at this point. And I wouldn't be disappointed if he does not make the big league roster because he's going to get, again, if he shows some production, he'll get a spring training non-roster invite, but he's probably not going to make a big league roster because everything is indicating time is up on his big league career. All right, well, that wraps up this edition of Locked On White Sox. Thank you for making Locked On White Sox your first listen today. For your second listen, find Locked On MLB. Hear about the Fall Classic with Sully, who has it covered every single day. Find Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And I'll be back tomorrow with a discussion on whether the Sox should be willing to do business with the Los Angeles Dodgers when it comes to a possible Garrett Crochet deal. Feel free to leave comments about today's discussion regarding which is the worst mark in franchise history, the 121 losses this year or the 1919 Black Sox scandal. Also talked about the random pitchers used this season that wasted our time and Jose Abreu's comeback attempt. You can leave those comments at the episode page on YouTube, X, formerly Twitter, at Todd J. Dub or at Locked On White Sox, or you can email me at lockedonwhitesox@gmail.com. Have a great day. See you tomorrow.